The 1990s produced more films than any decade that came before it. Around 12,000 titles, depending on how you count, which means for every Pulp Fiction or Shawshank Redemption that became part of the permanent conversation, there were hundreds of films that played their run, made varying impressions, and faded. Here are 9 underrated films that still hold up in 2026. Rounders was a modest box office footnote in 1998, but became an inspiration for a generation of online poker players. Directed by John Dahl, the same filmmaker behind Red Rock West and The Last Seduction, the screenplay comes from David Levian and Brian Koppelman. It was their first produced script, written after Koppelman lost $700 in an underground New York poker game. Matt Damon plays Mike McDermott, a law student with a gift for poker who can't stay away no matter how much it costs him. Edward Norton plays Worm, his reckless best friend who pulls him deep into New York's underground card rooms. The film treats poker not as a vice, but as a vocation. John Malkovich plays Teddy KGB, with a Russian accent he built by having a Russian woman read his lines aloud first, then mimicking her delivery.
This son of bitch all night, he chick, he trapped me!
It's one of the most memorably strange villain performances of the decade. The film came and went in theaters without much fanfare, but developed a cult following on DVD. Chris Moneymaker won the 2003 World Series of Poker main event after crediting Rounders as a direct influence. Lynn Ramsey was not yet 30 when Ratcatcher premiered at Cannes in 1999 to rapturous reviews. It was her debut feature, shot in the Govan neighborhood of Glasgow, with a crew composed entirely of first-time filmmakers. She had already won prizes at Cannes twice before for her short films, but this was the moment that announced her as a genuine filmmaker to watch. The film is set during Glasgow's 1973 bin men's strike, when garbage piled up across the city for months. 12-year-old James Gillespie lives on a housing estate with his struggling family, haunted by a secret he can't shake, and increasingly drawn to the canal near his home, where he retreats into a private world of his own. Barry Jenkins, who would go on to direct Moonlight, has cited it as one of the films that expanded his idea of what cinema could do. It didn't find a wide audience at the time, but the people it found never forgot it. Before Boogie Nights and Magnolia, there was Hard Eight. Paul Thomas Anderson wrote it specifically for Philip Baker Hall, whose brief performance in Midnight Run he had caught as a teenager in 1988 and never forgotten. The story follows Sidney, an older gambler of mysterious means who finds a young man named John, played by John C. Reilly, sitting outside a coffee shop. Sidney takes him under his wing, and the two form a bond. That becomes complicated when John marries a woman played by Gwyneth Paltrow and runs into serious trouble with a casino regular played by Samuel L. Jackson. It's set in the unglamorous edges of Reno, with 3 a.m. diners, cashier windows, and fluorescent light, feeling nothing like the glamorous version of casino life. The film grew out of Anderson's 1993 Sundance short, Cigarettes and Coffee, which also starred Hall. Anderson called Hall his favorite actor in the world, and the film exists because he wanted the world to know his name. One of the greatest directors of his generation launched his career with a monument to a character actor. The River Wild drops you straight into a family vacation turned hostage situation on one of the most dangerous stretches of whitewater in the country. Meryl Streep does Meryl Streep things playing Gail, a former river guide who takes her son and her struggling marriage on a rafting trip through Montana's backcountry. Kevin Bacon and John C. Reilly play charming strangers they meet on the water, but spoiler alert, they turn out to be not so charming. Directed by Curtis Hanson, the same filmmaker behind Bad Influence and The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, he later said he was blessed with 2 natural wonders on the film, the river and Meryl Streep. She rode every day for 3 months to prepare and ended up doing most of her own stunt work, including a rapid sequence where she was thrown from the raft and nearly drowned. The film came out in 1994, when the action genre belonged almost entirely to Schwarzenegger, Stallone, and Seagal. Streep stepping into an action thriller lead was against the grain of the era, and the film earned her both Golden Globe and SAG nominations, with Kevin Bacon picking up a Globe nomination of his own. The movie didn't flop, but it got lost in the shuffle and is worth another look. Fresh asks a 13-year-old with no acting experience to carry nearly every scene of a 90-minute crime film. Director Boaz Yakin found that kid in Sean Nelson, and what Nelson does in this role is one of the best young performances of the decade. Fresh is 12 years old and running drugs through Brooklyn, invisible to the people around him because he's too young to be a threat and too smart to make mistakes. What his father teaches him at the chessboard, that any piece can be sacrificed to get the king, becomes the architecture of everything he does. Boaz Yakin wrote and directed his feature debut, researching the script in the drug-ravaged neighborhoods of his native New York. Samuel L. Jackson plays Sam, Fresh's estranged father, a speed chess hustler who meets his son in Washington Square Park for games that double as the closest thing to parenting he can manage. Giancarlo Esposito plays Esteban, the heroin kingpin Fresh runs for. The film came out in August 1994, arriving in the same summer as Pulp Fiction, The Shawshank Redemption, and Forrest Gump. But in a year that crowded, Fresh never stood a chance. In the Mouth of Madness is the final film in John Carpenter's informal Apocalypse trilogy, following The Thing and Prince of Darkness. He directed it from a screenplay by Michael DeLuca, who at the time was sitting as president of New Line Cinema, the studio that released the film. DeLuca's script is rooted in the tradition of H.P. Lovecraft, a horror writer who built his fiction around the idea that the universe contains ancient forces so far beyond human comprehension that simply encountering them destroys a person's mind. Sam Neill plays an insurance investigator hired to track down the world's most popular horror novelist, who has vanished. He travels to a small New England town that isn't supposed to exist, and the film systematically dismantles his sense of reality. The premise, that a writer's fiction could become so widely believed it starts bleeding into the real world, is the kind of idea that sounds like a thought experiment until Carpenter gets hold of it. It received mixed reviews upon release and didn't do much at the box office, but has since gained a cult following. Steve Buscemi wrote Trees Lounge as a speculative autobiography, a film about the version of himself that never left Long Island. By 1996, he had already appeared in Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, and Fargo, but this was the life waiting for him if none of that happened. Tommy, played by Buscemi, is 31 years old, unemployed, and drinking his days away at a bar in a Long Island suburb where nobody leaves and nothing changes. He takes a job driving an ice cream truck, the same job Buscemi himself held before he made it as an actor, and gets drawn into a relationship with the niece of his ex-girlfriend that puts him in serious trouble with her father. The film doesn't treat Tommy's situation as tragic or cautionary. It just watches him, the way you'd watch someone you grew up with who never quite figured it out. Roger Ebert gave it 3.5 stars and called it the most accurate portrait of the daily saloon drinker he had ever seen. Nobody in Hollywood is safe from a flop. Switchback, written and directed by Jeb Stewart, who wrote The Fugitive and co-wrote Die Hard, seemed like a safe bet. Dennis Quaid plays FBI agent Frank LaCrosse, who's pulled off a serial killer case because the killer has kidnapped his son. But he continues pursuing the killer anyway, through the American Southwest. The film runs 2 parallel stories simultaneously, Quaid's obsessive pursuit on one track, and on the other, Danny Glover as Bob Goodall, an affable former railroad worker who picks up a hitchhiker, played by a young Jared Leto, somewhere in New Mexico. The film withholds which of the 2 men is actually the killer, and the structure keeps you off balance for most of its running time. It opened on Halloween 1997 with a budget of $38 million and only made $6 million back domestically. Jeb Stewart semi-retired from directing for over a decade after the release. But the film deserved better. It has an interesting structure, a cast full of strong character actors, and enough atmosphere to carry the ride. Ravenous shouldn't work, a black comedy horror film about cannibals set in the 1840s, but every strange choice it makes lands exactly right. Directed by Antonia Bird and written by Ted Griffin, who said he wrote the script as an allegory about Prozac and depression. It's set at a remote army outpost in the Sierra Nevada during the Mexican-American War. Guy Pearce plays Captain John Boyd, a cowardly soldier sent to the fort as punishment. His quiet existence is shattered when a stranger arrives claiming to be the sole survivor of a wagon train that turned to cannibalism in the mountains. The film draws on the Wendigo myth, a Native American legend in which consuming human flesh gives a person superhuman strength, but drives them into an insatiable hunger for more. The film opened in 1999 to mixed reviews, but has built a devoted cult following in the years since, and is now considered one of the most distinctive horror films of the decade.